Welcome to the Cannabis 101 podcast, your guide through the legalization and consumption of cannabis in Canada and beyond. Here's your host, Dean Millard.
Hello there and welcome to episode 68, hour number 1 of the Cannabis 101 podcast. My name is Dean Millard, and it's not just about getting high, it's about getting healthy. Thank you so much for joining us on this show. It's our first week with video. Hi, how are you? If you're watching, and if you're listening, you can watch on our YouTube and the WeTube channels, as well as our social media feeds. And it's our first week where we're splitting the show into 2-hour segments. Hour number 1 is today. This is Monday, depending on when you're listening. But it will be released on Mondays, and hour number 2 will be released on Wednesdays. But before we do anything, we always start out by finding out, what's your groove?
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Can you dig it?
Kinda grabs you by the boo-boo, don't it?
Pipe in a crate, long in a place.
This is great. This is the bee's knees.
Can you dig it?
So when I say what's your groove, if you're new to the show, I'm asking that if you're grooving with something, to let me know what it is. And, you know, it could be a joint, bong, CBD, an edible, a drink, who knows? Anything. Let me know if you are indeed grooving with something. Let me know what it is. I am going, for those watching, you can see, it's the Hexo Blue Dream, and a lot of places are having sales. This is obviously coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the legalization of cannabis in Canada. So there's going to be a lot of sales going on at a lot of different retail outlets as we celebrate this Saturday and Sunday. And I got this pen at Plant Life in St. Albert, the Aaron Ridge location. Really good deal on these, and Blue Dream it's it for me. It's my go-to. It's not a miracle cure for me, but it does certainly help improve things when I am having some tough times. So I got this at Plant Life. Check out your local Plant Life to find the really good deals. But wherever your store is going to have incredible sales, I'm sure, on the 2-year anniversary. Remember, 420 this year happened in the middle of COVID. Well, what we thought was the middle, maybe it's not, but certainly in some of the early terrible stages. So there was not a lot of celebrating. And I'm not saying there's going to be crazy parties in the streets, and there shouldn't be, but there's going to be a lot more, I think, going on as we celebrate the 2-year anniversary. So that is what this is what I'm grooving with today. Cool little light there, eh? At the lights up at the end as you inhale. I love it. Like I said, it's kind of my jam, as they might say. It really gets me going. Brings me out of some stuff, and I just generally enjoy it as well. All right, here is what's coming down the hash pipe on this episode today. David Wiley from the OZ is going to join us for This Week in Cannabis News. We're going to discuss how stock prices for cannabis surged after the vice presidential debate. Mark Zuckerberg making a donation to legalize all drugs, not just cannabis. We'll talk about THC drinks from the point of view of Esquire magazine, obviously a very popular magazine. And how about some PBS pot talk with a very popular PBS host. Melka LaBelle will also join us for the business of cannabis. We'll give you the latest Bud Biz buzz. We're going to be talking about decriminalizing in the U.S. That was also brought up by Kamala Harris during the U.S. vice presidential debate, and what that means for Canada in the long term. Route 1 Agency will be our game changers. If you are in the cannabis space and looking for a little bit of help, they can give you a helping hand. And I'm going to discuss some oil and gas refugees now making their way into the cannabis space. We'll also tell you our cannabis character is about being thankful, and we'll have weed word of the day as we roll on the show. But without further ado, let's get going with the cannabis character or question.
It's prize time. Chime in on the cannabis question.
Okay.
And you could win a Cannabis 101 podcast prize pack.
Pipe and a grape, bong and a blint.
Hit us up on any of our social media feeds or email us at cannabis101podcast@gmail.com.
Okay, here we go.
So our cannabis question today, and you can win a Cannabis 101 podcast prize pack just for chiming in. You don't have to have the best answer. We put all the answers in a hat, a cannabis hat, and we draw out a name, and then we present the winner. And you can chime in anonymously as well. So the cannabis question is, who are you thankful for in the cannabis industry? There's a lot of names. I'd like you to try to pick out one if you can. If you would like to name a few, certainly that is fine with me as well. But you know, I don't want to leave a lot of people out by naming several, so I'm just going to go with one name for me, and it's Grant Sanderson from Nova Cannabis, the vice president of cannabis at Nova, because he's a guy that I turned to for advice about this podcast in the very beginning. And he's a family friend of my wife's. His nephew also was drafted 5th overall by the Ottawa Senators this past week. It's pretty cool. Higher than Grant's brother, Jeff, who also played in the NHL. But anyway, Grant has been just a wealth of information for me, a lot of help in connecting me with different people. So, you know, this podcast is on episode 68. You know, we're I think we're doing pretty well, and a lot of that success I would you know, in the beginning, and certainly helping me get off the ground and you know, what sort of things people might be interested in, was a big help, was Grant Sanderson of Nova Cannabis. So that's who I'm thankful for. There's so many people in this industry that have helped me, and again, I don't want to offend by starting to name a whole bunch of people and leave somebody out, but certainly in the beginning, to help me get this show off the ground, to connect me with a few good people and give me some advice. I'm thankful for Grant Sanderson of Nova Cannabis. So that's the cannabis question. And as mentioned, you can chime in at any point. You just have to either email us at cannabis101podcast@gmail.com. You can get us on Twitter at the Cannabis 101. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Cannabis 101 podcast. So chime in, and you could get yourself in the mix for the Cannabis 101 podcast prize pack, just for telling us who you are thankful for in the cannabis industry. And I want to remind you to get the latest on the Cannabis 101 podcast every Friday with the Weed Weekly. All you do is sign up at the cannabis101podcast.ca and you're in the mix. We have a prize every Friday as well for subscribers only. So if you're not subscribed, head to the cannabis101podcast.ca, click subscribe, and join the fun with our Weed Weekly on Fridays. Plus, it's a good way to keep up with, hopefully, what is your favorite or one of your favorite cannabis podcasts.
What's happening? We'll tell you right now on This Week in Cannabis News.
My good friend David Wiley joins me as usual from Okanagan Z, the OZ. You can find it online at OkanaganZ.com and follow them on Twitter at Okanagan Z. And David, is not only good to hear from you, good to see you as we've launched video also on our new day. So a lot of stuff going on. How has your Thanksgiving weekend been?
Hello. It's great to see you. It's been good so far. Just munching on the usual Thanksgiving fun and enjoying family.
That is awesome. And you can celebrate in so many different ways. And I think a lot of people in the United States were celebrating after the vice presidential debate because, man, stocks of the weed variety were surging after that, weren't they, David?
They sure were. And I noticed it with my own stocks and didn't know why. And then, you put two and two together and realized that during the United States vice presidential debate, that Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris had said that marijuana would be decriminalized under a Joe Biden administration. And that resulted in a whole schwack of cannabis stocks going up. Particularly Canadian ones, big Canadian ones like Tilray, Canopy, Aphria. Heck, even Aurora got a bump from that comment. And this change would mean a lot of great things. It would mean that the criminal records would be expunged. It would likely impact banking for cannabis companies operating in the U.S., allowing them to use a bank to get credit or even just to open up an account, which they can't do right now. Everything in the U.S. is a cash economy. Interesting that the comment was that we would see decriminalization across the U.S. and not legalization. There is a difference there. It would mean that companies people wouldn't get in trouble for for possession, but it would still leave it up to a state-by-state basis to implement the kinds of changes that we would see in different states. So it's a fairly fascinating development. We're also seeing this coming from Kamala Harris, who is the lead sponsor of the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. The vote on that was delayed, and that would also create quite a few changes, including removing cannabis as a Schedule 1 drug.
Which is absolutely ridiculous that cocaine is seen as a healthier drug among the schedules that the United States puts out. And listen, we talked last week, David, about the ridiculousness of more people being in jail or having, being behind bars of some kind for possession than all of violent crimes combined last year. It's a ridiculous stat. It's a ridiculous fact. And this, at the very least, is one step closer to getting some of those people out of that situation and then maybe towards legalization. In Canada, that's how it really did start out with decriminalization and then it ended up with legalization. So who knows where it could go, but at least it's a step in the right direction, correct?
Absolutely. And that's what we want to see. We want to see people who are behind bars right now for really having a plant, smoking a plant. And that's ridiculous. So fingers crossed that the U.S. does go in this direction.
All right, let's jump into our next story. And this is an interesting one from Mark Zuckerberg. Yes, the man behind Facebook is also supporting decriminalization of marijuana.
Decriminalization of actually all drugs.
Oh.
And this was something that surprised me. I have tried to advertise a number of times on Facebook, and that ad gets rejected every single time. So to see that Mark Zuckerberg, through at least one of his foundations that is run by him and his wife, to see this kind of support is surprising, and it's hope for optimism as well. So this foundation has given $500,000 in support of Measure 110, and that would decriminalize all drugs in Oregon. So cannabis right there at the moment is legal, both medically and recreationally. And this is a huge societal shift. that we're likely going to be seeing here. The decriminalization across the board is gaining momentum in all kinds of places. And I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. Certainly a law change that would push more people toward doing things like meth or heroin or anything along those lines isn't something that we want to see. But when you come at it from a different angle, and as a parent myself, to think about how I would want my children treated were they to, God forbid, become addicted to a substance like this, I would want them to be treated as human beings. And what this change proposes is really a shift in the way that we look at people who are addicted to these harder substances. It means that we don't look at it as a criminal element anymore. Rather, we look at it as a health problem. And that's something that we're seeing particularly in BC with the downtown east side. We're seeing that when you try and just put people in jail, when you fine them, when you persecute them for possession or for drug use, that it really doesn't do anything to help them from a mental health perspective or a health perspective. So right now in Oregon, in 2018, there were almost 9,000 simple drug possession arrests. And that's actually more than one drug possession arrest per hour. And talking about the disproportionate number of people who are minorities affected by these kinds of laws, that's no different in Oregon, where we're seeing people who are Asian, Native American, or Black being persecuted for drug charges more than anyone else. So this is a fascinating change that we're seeing, and a surprising one too. So hopefully we'll see some forward movement happening.
You know, it might not be your cup of tea or her cup of tea or his cup of tea, but it could be somebody else's cup of tea with psilocybin in it if this ruling does go through, or this policy. And it really does, David, kind of point out, I think, how somebody views another person in society that is maybe vulnerable. And listen, I'll tell you, it's no different than how some people still and oftentimes, and it's getting better, but viewed mental illness. You know, they couldn't see it, so they didn't maybe think it was real. And some people think, well, I'm never going to get addicted to drugs, so that doesn't matter to me. But somebody in your family might, or your friend, and it's called compassion, and it's called a disease, just like mental health, just like cancer, just like diabetes. It's something that it's unfortunately sometimes brought on ourselves, but sometimes there are chemical imbalances and there's hereditary things in our genes that take us down this path. So it all comes down to compassion in my mind.
Yeah, very, very well put. And just thinking about our families on Thanksgiving even is a good time to reflect on how we feel about these kinds of issues.
It is strange that Mark Zuckerberg is involved in this, because I too have felt the wrath of not being able to do any kind of social media posts on Facebook because it's not federally legalized in the United States. And the same sort of thing with Apple, right? Like you can't use, I can't use the app on my iPhone for my Volcano because it's not federally legalized, and Apple is staying away from vapes. But you know what? Esquire is not staying away from THC infused beverages. And in fact, this, very prestigious publication had a pretty cool article about these THC drinks and the buzz they're making.
There's a big piece in Esquire about cannabis beverages, and it makes sense because it's one of the more accessible ways to partake. This was written by Julia Bainbridge, and she's, kind of a big deal. Published in the New York Times, Bon Appetit, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. She's also the author of a book called Good Drinks, which is an alcohol-free recipe book. Her argument in this piece is that tacky cans and THC overload is a thing of the past, and now people are seeing cannabis drinks as brightly colored marketing, that they're tasty and microdosed. So there's less chance that people are just going to end up on the couch locked for 4 hours. Now, for this piece, which is a great read, she talked to her friend Kat Turner, who through the pandemic, she's an executive chef and has been working 18-hour days in the restaurant business. And as people do, particularly in the restaurant industry, that she's taken to alcohol in the evening and found that a few too many drinks every night has really started to tank her productivity and led to bouts of depression. So her friend had switched to 2 milligram drinks to relax and found that that was a big help. She was hangover free in the morning and really enjoyed them. Now, drinks themselves are one of the fastest growing drinks among a really important group of cannabis consumers. And that's curious female users who are between the ages of 35 and 55. And that comes according to Tracy Mason, who is the CEO of a company called House of Saka, which produces cannabis drinks. Beverages themselves are just generally more familiar, and people tend to stay away, especially people who are new to cannabis, tend to stay away from smoking and want to have a different kind of experience. My own experience with these kinds of drinks is that they hit fast now, they taste great, they wear off relatively quickly, and we're starting to see some pretty cool stuff. One of my favorite breweries, actually, Lagunitas in the States, has produced an IPA-inspired hi-fi hops drink, which is one of the first ones in the U.S. to use nanotechnology. So there's lots of changes, and it's really interesting to see that cannabis is being covered in bigger, more prestigious magazines. It's being written about at a lot more places, and it's really starting to get out there and become normalized just through the media.
Yeah, it really is such a cool thing. And, listen, the whole summer barbecue season really didn't happen this year, where if it did, if we were in some sort of normal year, I think that cannabis drinks would be an even bigger hit. I will say they have to work on the taste. You can call it flavorless, but you can't call it tasteless. Some of them are hard to choke down, but this is also the very beginning, right? Like, I'm sure the first wheel wasn't perfectly round, so I'm sure that these drinks are going to get better tasting, but they are a great option for people. And I love them. I love they come on fast. Then it's almost like having your 2-drink limit. You wait your time for the off, and then you're okay. But it's the lack of a hangover. I know golf trips, camping, all that stuff. I was taking more cannabis drinks than I was taking beer and rum and rye that I used to. And going back to that article about the grogginess and the depression. Yeah, I got a lot of that from my alcohol. And I'd go on a golf trip, 3-day golf trip with the boys, and I'd be done for a week after. So this is a great alternative. And as she mentioned in there, she would go to parties and be a little bit more chatty, but she'd feel great. So it's you can start low and go slow and not end up sleeping at the party because you had too many cannabis drinks, right? Like it really is a good. I think it's just a great alternative. Actually, not a good alternative, a great alternative, I'll say.
I quite like the taste myself.
Really?
Not every drink. A few of them have a little not the greatest taste, if I could be polite. But some of the new ones out there are really wonderful. Yeah, the House of Terpenes, limonene and sparkling tonic is one of my favorites. There aren't very many alcoholic drinks that would even parallel that one for taste, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the only two that I've found that I can say actually tasted what they were supposed to taste like, unfortunately, is the houseplant grapefruit and the Basecamp CBD iced tea. The other stuff is still a work in progress for me, but I did take your advice, and I used my Very Well drops in my coffee. Awesome. Totally works in the for those great wake and bake, wake and drop mornings, I guess you might say, right? So I will give you kudos to that. So there are always ways to work around that for sure. All right, speaking of work, for those that are watching, they're seeing on the screen that, PBS travel guy Rick Steves is explaining why he is backing legal cannabis in New Jersey. What do you think of this story?
This is great. The public broadcasting service.
Yes.
Basically the American version of the CBC. And these kinds of people are very accessible to folks who may still have hangups, generational hangups, even over cannabis. Rick Steves has actually been an advocate for cannabis for a long time. He was there even when the first states were legalizing, Washington and Colorado, years ago as part of that campaign. And since then has really been helping other campaigns in other states. And we have 4 different states coming up for a vote on recreational legalization: Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota. So far, there are already 11 states that have approved recreational cannabis. It's really reaching an inflection point. And as far as Steves is concerned, he says that this is something that he really believes in. He wants to fight for the rights of people and really against the inherent racism that's involved in the war on drugs. And he says he believes that legalizing cannabis really is common sense. Steves himself, he's a casual smoker, he says, and for him, his favorite thing to do is to play the piano high. It's fun. As a guitar player myself, I just love to get high and play the guitar. There's very few things in life that compare to playing music with a nice little cannabis buzz on. If you've never tried it, I would say give it a shot.
Yeah. I have to learn how to play music first, though.
It's pretty accessible. Yeah, a few hours a week, and you'll be jamming with the rest of us pretty quick.
There you go.
Steves is really fascinating in the sense that he spends about 100 days in Europe every year. It has done so for the last 30 years. He says that there are a lot of lessons the U.S. can learn from Europe, and particularly, and I love how he says this, the folly of legislating morality.
Yes.
And he says his European friends tell him all the time that society has to make a choice to either tolerate alternative lifestyles or to build more prisons. And in the US, they've chosen to build more prisons. So yeah, while it's technically illegal, cannabis's possession across most of Europe, they're a lot more lax than the US. And the Europe is much more of a gray area. Think about the Dutch, for example, where they're really famous for their easygoing approach to cannabis, but it wasn't legalized there, it was decriminalized. And here's something to think about. So off the top, we talked about how we're looking at decriminalization in the US rather than legalization. Well, the US pushed through a trade agreement in the UN that had required all signatories to basically wage trade sanctions against countries that flat out legalized cannabis. And Canada today is actually in flagrant violation of the UN drug treaties that it did sign, making it a bit of an uncomfortable situation. So when we wonder sometimes why the US looks at decriminalization over legalization, if it were to legalize federally, it would be contravening its own piece of legislation. So something to think about there. And yeah, the idea that they're building prisons rather than embracing alternate lifestyles is sad.
Yeah, well, you could rewrite that legislation. What happens if half the countries that have gone down that path decide to legalize? Because there are over 50 countries that are looking at some sort of cannabis reform, whether it's decriminalization, whether it's legalization, whether it's just medical. I mean, there's a lot of countries. I think that's going to have to be have some sort of taken a look at because of the amount of countries that are looking at this plant. And it's true. We can look at Amsterdam has been known as the weed capital of the world for how long? They're not legal. It's just decriminalized. It's just very relaxed. It's just a very an open-minded look at it. So there's a lot of things I think that could happen. I love the fact that Montana could be looking at this because now we can go down back and forth on great golf vacations. There's some great golf courses down there, and you can get your cannabis there. Because I don't know about you, David, but I am starting, not that I'm doing a lot of traveling with COVID, but when I do look at travel plans, I look at the, where I can access my cannabis because I do use it for medicine and I also do use it for recreation. So I think a lot of people are going to be like that with their travel plans over the next little while.
I think you're right. And I haven't seen very much of the world, but I have seen a lot of Canada. And Canada is a beautiful place. So I don't mind just exploring our wonderful country. There's lots of great golf courses out here in the Okanagan, Dean. So you're welcome to come out and join me.
You betcha. All right, David, this has been awesome. Our first video of vehicle of this show, and I'm looking forward to it, and our new switch on the Mondays, which I think will give people a little bit easier time of digesting the podcast. It was getting a little bit tough in that 2-hour format, but I love chatting about the good news and the even better news when, popular people from PBS are promoting cannabis. It's a lot of P's in that sentence, but have yourself a great rest of the Thanksgiving Monday, David, and thanks very much for joining me on the program today.
Great to talk to you and great to see you.
This is the Cannabis 101 podcast, your guide through the legalization and consumption of cannabis in Canada and beyond.
I want to tell you about the Cannabis and Hemp Expo, which has been postponed once again until late April, the 24th and 25th of 2021. It will be at the Edmonton Expo Center. We will be there on location, broadcasting, doing some episodes, and having some fun. So if you're in that Edmonton area, please come down and say hi. You can get more information at www.cannabishempexpo.com. And when this event does get going, we certainly will have some tickets available for Cannabis 101 podcast listeners.
This is The Business of Cannabis, a joint venture between the Green Generation Co. and the Cannabis 101 podcast. Bringing you the latest bud, biz, buzz.
Malka LaBelle from the Green Generation Co. joins me as usual on the Business of Cannabis. You can find out more information at www.greengencompany.com. Malka, welcome. Great to see you. Great to hear you. How was your Thanksgiving weekend been?
Thanks, Dean. It's kind of been a weird one. It kind of feels like just another weekend. I don't know. I don't know about you, but we sort of just kind of skipped over it.
Yeah, we're pretty low key around here. We did steak and potatoes for our Thanksgiving dinner, but still thankful for being able to talk about cannabis legally in our country as we get set to celebrate another anniversary. And to kind of get us into that vein, let's talk a little bit about what happened this week down in the States. And Kamala Harris mentioning the word decriminalizing cannabis. It's been something she's been on for a little while. What were your thoughts and the impact it could have on Canada?
Yeah, so, this was the first time I really clued into thinking about it from the context of the industry in Canada. So her stance, even when she was running for president, was on decriminalizing cannabis. And she's actually part of the SAFE, or the more the program to basically allow people to come out of prisons and decriminalize cannabis. So she's been on that track for a while. The fact that this was all of a sudden or sort of come to my top of mind was really to think about what's the difference between decriminalization and legalization from an industry perspective in Canada. And this is a question that comes up actually all the time more in conversation with like my clients and people that I'm talking to, like cross-border. It's not really known what it's gonna be. Doesn't matter who chooses to do what with it, doesn't matter what the election does. But I wanted to clarify what I believe is the differences between the two and how decriminalization really is different from legalization and how that can impact Canada from an industry perspective. So decriminalization to legalization is like a spectrum. Like if you want to think of it like, fully illegal is like far one side and full legalization is far the other side, and decriminalization is kind of like in the middle somewhere, where I believe, decriminalization is defined as really loosening the criminal penalties imposed for people that use cannabis or possess cannabis or marijuana in the States. And so it's kind of like, okay, we're just not going to make it illegal anymore, but it doesn't really create any really like industry construction, like imposing tax regimes or, creating new laws around it. So what that means is in Canada, we went the far route of legalization, which is that essentially we created a new industry. So the government can regulate it, they can impose taxes on it, they can, create laws to protect citizens around it. There's like a legal framework and structure for changing the laws. So that's the full gamut of legalization, and that's what we're doing in Canada. And, it's a slow and long road, a slow burn, literally, for a lot of people. But what this does in essence is if, cannabis has become legal in various states in the US, but not all of them. And effectively what decriminalization would do federally, with bringing in like the safe banking laws, which I think is really the big part of it, is it's going to allow for a big influx of cash into an investment into the cannabis industry, both for Canadian companies, for US companies, and any company really. There's going to be like a kind of like a halo effect. And my belief is that, U.S. companies that are already operating legally in the states in which they are, and MSOs in particular, which are multi-state operators, you're going to get to hear that a lot more if you haven't already. MSOs are companies that have taken on cannabis in legal states and are operating in a very complex state-by-state situation, very similar to how we operate in Canada across different provincial jurisdictions. But with the allowing of the laws for banking and safe investment, it basically de-risks people's money. And so therefore we've already seen that cannabis has had a pretty big increase in popularity with COVID because people like to buy it and use it. And those numbers are already being evident early on. So we're going to see a lot more money into the industry is my prediction. And we've already seen it happening on the stock market. Like as of, last week, right after this, the vice presidential debate, the U.S. and Canadian stocks for publicly traded companies that are operating in multi-jurisdictions on the New York Stock Exchange the NASDAQ took a boost. So I saw that in my portfolio, and then a lot of people, like I think 20% gains in some of them already were seen for companies, like even Canadian companies that are just listed on the US exchanges or like the NASDAQ. So that's a really, really good thing. That's really been the big hampering so far within the industry. So even with the decriminalization, or any form of that to legalization, I think we're going to really be positively benefited from that.
Well, for sure. And, the cannabis factor certainly isn't as big a part of the U.S. election as it was in Canada leading up and why we got legalization. But it was brought up. It is something that Kamala Harris has, been pushing. And, Bernie Sanders was big on legalization. And I think Kamala Harris helped Joe Biden get to that point a little bit. And while I don't think it's going to be as big of a point in the U.S. election as it was in Canada, I still think there's going to be a factor. And decriminalization is at least that first step. At least we can get some people out of prison for the ridiculous things that are going on. I mean, there were more arrests for possession of marijuana in the United States than all violent crimes last year. That is bloody ridiculous.
Yeah, and one other point, actually, you see, not necessarily being a federal election topic, but what it is going to be is a state election topic. Yes. And I just wrote a blog post about this. It's about to be published, and it's about what we're seeing is that these Republican politicians have sort of left the Republican Party and are running as independent parties under the cannabis legalization or the marijuana legalization state by state. So it's kind of been this situation where at a state Senate level, where the states want legalization. So forget about federally, it doesn't really matter. They want to legalize it within their state. And it's kind of been taken over. A lot of these independent parties are running, and they're former Republicans. So you have to check out my blog post about that, because I go into the details of why I think that is. I think it's very fascinating. There's a bit of, some people have some conspiracy theories behind it, but I have a different perspective. But yeah, you'll have to check that out on my website the next day or so.
All right, that's at www.greengencompany.com. Let's talk change makers, and the people we're focusing on today, Route One, and for those watching, the website is up on the screen, www.route1agency.com. So tell us a little bit about Route One.
So Route One, it's sort of one of those cool full circle stories that I have to say it was very interesting to discover these guys again. So basically, their business is based on a similar model to the alcohol industry, like rep model. So very similar, a lot of the tenants around the distribution of cannabis are basically modeled exactly after the alcohol distribution model, down to the same systems that they're using. So these guys actually attended my Cannabis 101 workshop that I actually did exactly a year ago. And they came to the workshop over a couple different sessions. They came independently, and I didn't know they were related to each other until afterwards. But so they were just interested. So they're liquor reps. They were part of the liquor industry and had been for a long time. And after after my workshop, I followed up with them, like, hey, thanks for coming. How did you hear about us or whatever? And they're like, we just found you on the Eventbrite. But what was really cool was that, we're thinking of getting into this industry with our knowledge of the legal alcohol route, particularly in Alberta. What do you think? And so we had a couple of discussions around it, and I gave them some ideas, and essentially they chose to work on that marketing section, which is huge, which is essentially replacing what is sort of there but doesn't really exist, which is essentially a in-store sales rep that's there to represent brands. And so some brands have this. The bigger brands, I would say, I met the Riff Girl, so she's part of I think it's the Afria brands. Mm-hmm. So some of the bigger players have their own sales team, and they'll go in and rep all the different brands that are made by that particular producer. But then there's all these new sort of young or independent or micros coming up that don't have that kind of representation, and they're essentially just on the sell sheet from for the provincial retailer. Right. So their plan is to go and talk about these new brands and products into all the stores focused on Alberta. Their Route One concept is, we're building the cannabis highway. Do you want to lift? Which I think is awesome. So yeah, I think they've got a good thing, and they're just getting started, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that's it's really cool. When you talk about the cannabis industry, how many sales reps have you met that were from the alcohol industry? It's flooded with them, right? So it is different. I obviously think there is, but there are some general things that you can bring to it and then improve on it with the related cannabis industry. So there's a lot of people from that industry, pharmaceutical as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely great. And they're bringing their connections, their understanding of how the industry works, their contacts, their network. And that's great. that's what people need to do. I think, a lot of people call me and ask me how do I get into the industry? I'm like, well, tell me what you do. Where's your experience? Because what we're understanding is that pretty much anything can apply, even on our next topic, it's so far-fetched, but actually there's been quite a few examples where people from other industries where you think that has nothing to do with cannabis, it doesn't necessarily matter. You can learn about the cannabis plant, but what you know from your existing background, that's what these are doing. That these guys are doing with Route One. That's why they're a change maker to me. Is that they're taking what they know and kind of pivoting, so slight change, but applying it to the new industry that we're in right now.
Well, Malka, you don't have to look any farther than what you're looking at right now to find somebody who was not anywhere near the cannabis industry before I got into this podcast. I did sports media for over 22 years. And certainly athletes weren't talking about cannabis. So you bring what you have to this industry, and then you learn. I have no problem saying I didn't know what a terpene was until I got into this show. My cannabis experience used to be, here's $50, give me a bag, or going into a retail store and asking for THC. And now, because you can learn so much about this, it's all about, that's exactly it. It's your past experience and your passion to learn and research and learn new things is what's going to be able to have people be successful in this industry, in my opinion, anyway.
Fully, yeah, exactly. And it doesn't mean it's a big career change. Like, so a lot of people sometimes get scared when they think like, oh my gosh, I have to totally change everything I know and everything I do and like start from scratch to get into a new industry. And that's just not true. Like, there's so many applications where your knowledge from before is an asset to the new industry. So, don't forget everything you know in order to jump on board.
Exactly. That's a really, really good point. All right. For those watching, that is an interesting picture, and that's where we're going with what it means to be green. And we're greening the planet by oil and gas refugees. And apologize for those just listening, but you can watch the show on our YouTube and our WeTube channel, as well as our social media feeds as well. So explain what we're talking about, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of people from different industries, and oil and gas, it actually might be one of the biggest, isn't it?
Yeah, so at least in Alberta. I mean, so here's the massive situation of a bunch of stuff happening at the same time. What's that called? Like a quagmire? I don't know. Anyway, we're sitting in the middle of a massive crash of energy and oil demand. Like an honest to God organic not need for oil or gas because we're not going anywhere because of COVID. And before that, the oil industry had been on a decline for a long time. But the people that are in the oil and gas industry, the topic that I'm covering here is that they're really resilient people. And why? Well, because they have suffered through some highs and some lows. We call them oil and gas cowboys in some cases, which is my reference here with the cowboy on the pump jack. These people know how to ride the bull. They've been through some really, really tough times before. And how the term oil and gas refugees, where that came up was, I literally got reconnected with a former client of mine. I used to be in the oil and gas software and services side of business. And my clients, we called them oil and gas entrepreneurs or emerging oil and gas companies. And that's because they literally had all of their skin in the game. They were young and small, and they all had a 5-year exit plan. They're like, we're going to drill all these wells and find all this oil, and we're going to be these cowboys. We put our entire house, all of our children's, college funds and everything we own on the line to do this. And the regulations in Alberta were extremely strict, but not well understood. And that was what I was selling with software to help that. So I would go into my client's office, who had these great glowing, hope for the future and what their business was going to do. They were really working hard to be within the regulations, which were really about protecting the land and the water and the planet and all those things. So they already had the mentality, we're doing oil and gas, but we're going to do it as green as possible. So that was already in their sort of purview. And then the oil and gas refugees. So I come back, 4 years later, and I'm walking into an office again, and it's like, oh my God, these are the same clients that I had in oil and gas, but they're not in the oil and gas business anymore. Now they're in the cannabis business. And that's literally the president of the company says to me, we're oil and gas refugees. I'm like, I am a member of the tribe. Like, we're all in this together. So that's where the term came from. He literally said it, and I love that phrase, and I use it a lot. And really, it came down to, these are really entrepreneurial people. They have, a lot of them have high credentials. They're engineers, they're accountants. They have a ton of cred figuring out how to make metrics work when their conditions around them are next to impossible to predict. And like things like we used to call the trifecta, we had fires, floods, and oil crashing prices all happening at the same time. So all of the externalities of their world used to go up and down in massive, heart attack inducing type situations. So they took that, that spirit and jumped over into the cannabis sector, where it has been just the same in terms of ups and downs. And that's the indomitable spirit, the resilience, and the kind of mentality that not only that these people have, but it's the ethos of my company. And my clients are all very smart people, and they wear their engineering pinky ring with pride. They know how to build things. They know how to design things. They know how to do accounting and regulatory challenges, and working with regulators to find problems and solutions, and working to make the planet and people's health still of forefront importance with the products and services that they're selling. So that's what this is about. They're just as interested in greening the planet, even though the greater world maybe didn't think that.
Right.
I was sitting at their boardroom tables as they're trying to figure out how not to, make things, worse for the climate than they already were. As an oil and gas company, now they're coming into the green world of cannabis, and they've got a great mentality and great success already setting up their companies. So it's only good things from here.
Well, it was a perfect storm, unfortunately, that pushed a lot of people out of the oil and gas field, and hopefully it's a perfect storm in a good way, getting into the cannabis, using that knowledge, as we just mentioned. But the one thing that you mentioned is working with regulators. Well, that's the cannabis industry in a nutshell. I mean, almost everybody in this cannabis industry has to follow some sort of regulations. And if you have prior experience, it gives you a leg up, at least on, how to deal with people.
Yeah. And you know what, the thing that I learned from them being sort of I would say almost like a middleman in that sense, because we were creating a product to help them manage the regulatory burden that was on them. You know what? Like, one of the best expressions that I think really encompasses it is, let's come together for a solution. Like, they stopped thinking about the regulator as the enemy, and they started thinking about them. How are we going to work together? And that's the mentality that worked in the oil and gas business, and then it's working for people right now in the cannabis sector. If they work with the regulator who are learning this as well, the provincial governments didn't know anything more about cannabis than the people that were in the industry in front of them. So they're all in it together, and they're learning as they go. And the good thing is they're adaptable. Doing it provincially has allowed them to be adaptable, and it will continue to be adaptable. And that's a good thing. So sometimes regulation is a really scary thing, but because we made cannabis legal federally in Canada, there's a framework in which to change the laws, you know, so that's cool.
100%. Malka, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to see you and hear you on this edition of the Cannabis 101 podcast as we move forward on our new split day format as well. So lots of new stuff coming out of this, and there's always something new coming out of the cannabis industry. Thank you so much once again for joining me. Have a great rest of your holiday Monday.
Thanks, Dean. Enjoy your day as well.
Bud, dope, flower, ganja, Mary Jane.
We all have our own language when it comes to cannabis.
Herb, John Lennon, plant, Thai stick, salad.
So let's explore another weed word of the day.
Samuel L. Jackson, The Hobbit's Leaf, Lady Gaga, 420.
So, weed word of the day. This is how we do it. We give you one slang word and one standard word when it comes to the cannabis industry or cannabis use. And the word bouldered is one that we're going with today as far as the slang word. That just means basically you're beyond stoned. You're couch lock, you got giggle mania, whatever it is. You're just really rocked. You're not stoned. You're not rocked. You're bouldered. Basically, you're trapped under a boulder of THC. So yeah, that's boulder. What word would you guys use when one of your buddies or somebody, your maybe your wife or your husband, your brother or sister, somebody gets really, really bouldered? What word do you use for that one? I'd love to hear that. Hit me up on Twitter at the Cannabis 101 or email me cannabis101podcast@gmail.com. The standard word we're going with is carb cap, and that is used in dabbing to control the heat and to control the airflow. Usually it's like almost like a bulb-like thing. It's obviously it's a material that's not going to break or shatter because the heat is crazy. I have one that's actually looks like a duck. So there's all kinds of designs and everything. On the last week we talked with Levi Hornak from Stonesmiths, and they have the Slash. They have two little holes on the side as for airflow, and you can plug them if you want to with your finger as a type of a carb cap. The Utilian 5, I know, has a couple of options for airflow and stuff. So it's a dabbing term, and it's basically to, as mentioned, control the heat and airflow as you take your hit. And it's obviously, I think it makes it much better when you are dabbing to use a carb cap of some sorts for sure. All right, if you're watching this, you maybe already know about our YouTube channel or the WeedTube channel, or maybe you're just watching it on social media, but make sure you check out future episodes. We're going to have product reviews. We're going to have so much more going on now that we can actually involve video. So definitely make sure you are checking out our channels on the WeedTube, YouTube, and we'll be streaming on our social media feeds as well.
This is the Cannabis 101 podcast, your guide through the legalization and consumption of cannabis in Canada and beyond.
And that's going to wrap up this first hour of this week of the Cannabis 101 podcast. Hour number 2 will come out on Wednesday, featuring Jim Hole as our feature interview of Atlas Growers. Can't wait for that. And Chris Ianson, the manager of Nova Cannabis Jasper Ave, as our educator on What's That Strain. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please let us know. Reach out to any of our social media feeds or our email, cannabis101podcast@gmail.com. Or leave us a review. Subscribe. Let us know what you think of the show. Really, really appreciate it. If you think you'd make a good guest for the show, or if you want to join the program as an advertiser, please hit us up, cannabis101podcast@gmail.com. Always love telling great stories. And that will wrap things up for us. Thanks to David Wiley from the OZ, and of course to Malcolm LaBelle from the business of cannabis from the Green Gen Company. GreenGenerationCo.com is where you can find that. Thank you so much for you, the listener, and the viewer, for joining us. And as we do on every show, we end things with the song Marijuana from the artist My Dead Dog. Until next week, or until Wednesday, I guess I should say, it's not just about getting high, it's about getting healthy.
Kind of grabs you by the boo-boo, don't